Hello and welcome to Liberty Readers. I am Candy, the storybook lady. Thank you for joining me again as we continue on with our adventures with the horse and his boy, starring our lead character, Shasta. Now, Shasta has run away from home, right? Now, who did he run away home with? That's right, the horse named Bree. Now, there's something special about Bree. What is it? Correct. Bree can talk. He's a talking horse from Narnia. And he and Shasta met up in the beginning of the book and decided to run away because Shasta's supposed father, but he found out he's not actually his father, was going to sell him off to be a slave. And Shasta and Bree decided to run away to go to Narnia. Bree wants to return there because he's from Narnia, and Shasta had always wanted to travel north. So as they're traveling along, they meet another pair. Who do they meet? That's right, they meet a girl named Arvis and her horse named Hwin, right? So what's special about Hwin? That's right, she can also talk. So we have two talking horses, we have Shasta and we have Arvis, and they're all headed to Narnia. So since they're all headed the same direction, they decided to team up. And what was the challenge they had to face together as a team? Yes, they had to get through the city called Tashban. And so they were trying to be, discreet and kind of keep their heads down, pretend like they're not important, and just get through the town so they could get through onto Narnia. Were they successful? They weren't. Oh my goodness, so much happened, right? First they get separated and Shasta ends up with Queen Susan and King Edmund of Narnia. They've mistaken him for a prince named Corin. And so he gets caught up with them, and they have their own set of troubles because they're trying to escape as well. And seemingly the royalty, the Prince of Tashban, wants to marry Queen Susan, but she doesn't want to marry him. Blah, blah. And so they're trying to get out also. And then what happens next? That's right, Prince Corin ends up arriving, right? So Prince Corin comes, Shasta meets him face to face, and there's kind of something unusual about Prince Corin, right? Yes, he and Shasta look exactly alike. So as Shasta's going out, Prince Corin comes in. Shasta leaves the king and queen of Narnia to meet up with his friends because they're supposed to meet up at the tombs. So he goes there and waits for them. And do they show up? No, they don't. And so he spends the night alone, right? And somebody does show up though, right? Yeah, a lion. Do we think we know who that lion might be? Yeah, I think it's Aslan, personally. So the book didn't say that, but it said a lion showed up and kind of protected him that night. And I just have a funny feeling that it could be Aslan, but we'll have to wait and see to find out for sure. And then the next day, what happens? Do you remember? Yeah, Shasta waited all day for his friends, and then towards the end of the day, who did he see coming towards him? Bree and Hwin, the horses. But it wasn't a good scene, was it? No, they were being carried or being led by someone we don't know, and it looked like they were enslaved somehow. And we don't know where Arvis is. So we have a big mess right now. So we got to figure out, how are these guys going to get back together? Are they going to get away? Where's Arvis? What's going to happen to Queen Susan and King Edmund? There's a lot going on. We're in the middle of it. We're in the thick of it. So we got a lot to read tonight and see what we will find out. So without further ado, let's get started. What had really happened was this. When Arvis saw Shasta hurried away by the Narnians and found herself alone with two horses who, very wisely, wouldn't say a word, she never lost her head even for a moment. She grabbed Bree's halter and stood still, holding both the horses, and though her heart was beating as hard as a hammer, she did nothing to show it. As soon as the Narnian lords had passed, she tried to move on again, but before she could take a step, another crier, "Bother all these people," thought Arvis, was shouting out, "Way, way, way! Way for the Tarkheena Larsarleen!" And immediately following the crier came 4 armed slaves, and then 4 bearers carrying a litter, which was all aflutter with silken curtains and all a jingle with silver bells, and which scented the whole street with perfumes and flowers. After the litter, female slaves in beautiful clothes, and then a few grooms, runners, pagers, and the like. And now Arvis made her first mistake. She knew Lazarline quite well, almost as if they had been at school together, because they had often stayed in the same houses and been to the same parties, and Arvis couldn't help looking up to see what Lazarline looked like, now that she was married and had a very great position indeed, and a very great person indeed. It was fatal. The eyes of the 2 girls met, and immediately Lazarline sat up in the litter and burst at the top of her voice, "Arvis, what on earth are you doing here? Your father—" There was not a moment to lose. Without a second's delay, Arvis let go the horses, caught the edge of the litter, swung herself up beside Lazarline, and whispered furiously in her ear, "Shut up! Do you hear? Shut up! You must hide me. Tell your people." "But, darling," began Lazarline in the same loud voice. She didn't in the least mind making people stare. In fact, she rather liked it. "Do what I tell you, or I'll never speak to you again," hissed Arvis. "Please be quick, Laz. It's frightfully important. Tell your people to bring those 2 horses along. Pull the curtains of the litter and get away somewhere where I can't be found. And do hurry." "All right, darling," said Lazarline in her lazy voice. "Here, 2 of you take the Tarkheena's horses." This was to the slaves. "And now home." "I say, darling, do you think we really want the curtains drawn on a day like this? I mean to say." But Arvis had already drawn the curtains, enclosing Lazarline and herself in a rich and scented, but rather stuffy, kind of tent. "I mustn't be seen," she said. "My father doesn't know I'm here. I'm running away." "Oh, my dear, how perfectly thrilling," said Lazarline. "I'm dying to hear all about it. Darling, you're sitting on my dress. Do you mind?" "That's better. It's a new one. Do you like it? I got it at—" "Oh, Laz, do be serious," said Arvis. "Where is my father?" "Didn't you know?" said Lazarline. "He's here, of course. He came to town yesterday and is asking about you everywhere. And to think of you and me being here together and his not knowing anything about it. It's the funniest thing I've ever heard." And she went off into giggles. She always had been a terrible giggler, as Arvis now remembered. "It isn't funny at all," she said. "It's dreadfully serious. Where can you hide me?" "No difficulty at all, my dear girl," said Lazarline. "I'll take you home. My husband's away and no one will see you. It's not much fun with the curtains drawn. I want to see people. There's no point in having on a new dress if one's going to go about shut up like this." "I hope no one heard you when you shouted to me like that," said Arvis. No, of course, darling," said Lazarline absentmindedly. "But you haven't even told me yet what you think of the dress." "Another thing," said Arvis. "You must tell your people to treat those 2 horses very respectfully. That's part of the secret. They're really talking horses from Narnia." "Fancy," said Lazarline. "How exciting! And oh, darling, have you seen the barbarian queen from Narnia? She's staying in the Tashbaan at present. They say Prince Rabadash is madly in love with her. There have been the most wonderful parties and hunts and things all this last fortnight. I can't see that she's so very pretty herself, but some of the Narnian men are lovely. I was taken out on a river party the day before yesterday, and I was wearing my... How shall we prevent your people telling everyone that you've got a visitor? Dressed like a beggar's brat in your house. It might so easily get round to my father. Now, don't you keep fussing. There's a dear, said Lazarine. We'll get you some proper clothes in a moment. And here we are. The bearers had stopped and the litter was being lowered. When the curtains had been drawn, Aravis found that she was in a courtyard garden very like the one that Shasta had been taken to in a few minutes earlier in another part of the city. Lazarine would have gone indoors at once, but Aravis reminded her in a frantic whisper to say something to the slaves about not telling anyone of her mistress's strange visitor. Ugh, sorry, darling. It had gone right out of my head, said Lazarine. Here, all of you, and you, doorkeeper, no one is to be let out of the house today, and anyone I catch talking about this young lady will be first beaten to death and then burned alive, and after that to be kept on bread and water for 6 weeks. There. Although Lazarine had said she was dying to hear Aravis's story, she showed no sign of really wanting to hear it at all. She was, in fact, much better at talking than at listening. She insisted on Aravis having a long and luxurious bath — Calormene baths are famous — and then dressing up in the finest clothes before she let her explain anything. The fuss she made about choosing the dress nearly drove Aravis mad. She remembered now that Lazarine had always been like that, interested in clothes and parties and gossip. Aravis had always been more interested in bows and arrows and horses and dogs and swimming. You will guess that each thought the other silly, but when at last they were both seated after a meal, it was chiefly of whipped cream and jelly and fruit and ice sort, in a beautiful pillared room, which Aravis would have liked better if Lazarine's spoiled pet monkey hadn't been climbing about it all the time. Lazarine at last asked her why she was running away from home. When Aravis had finished telling her the story, Lazarine said, "But, darling, why don't you marry Ahoshta Tarkan? Everyone's crazy about him. My husband says he is beginning to be one of the greatest men in Calormen. He has just been made Grand Vizier, now old Axartha has died. Didn't you know?" "I don't care. I can't stand the sight of him," said Aravis. "But, darling, only think. 3 palaces, and one of them, that beautiful one, down on the lake at the Ilkeen. Positively ropes of pearls, I'm told. Baths of ass's milk. And you'd see such a lot of me." "He can keep his pearls and palaces as far as I'm concerned," said Aravis. "You always were a queer girl, Aravis," said Lazarine. "What more do you want?" In the end, however, Aravis managed to make her friend believe that she was in earnest and even to discuss plans. There would be no difficulty now about getting the 2 horses out of the north gate and then onto the tombs. No one would stop or question a groom in fine clothes leading a war horse and a lady saddled down to the river, and Lazarine had plenty of grooms to send. It wasn't so easy to decide what to do about Aravis herself. She suggested that she could be carried out in the litter with the curtains drawn, but Lazarine told her that litters were only used in the city, and the sight of one going out through the gate would be certain to lead to questions. When they had talked for a long time, and it was all the longer because Aravis found it hard to keep her friend to the point, at last Lazarine clapped her hands and said, "Oh, I have an idea. There is one way of getting out of the city without using the gates. The Tisrock's garden, may he live forever, runs right down to the water, and there is a little water door. Only for the palace people, of course, but then you know, dear," here she teetered a little, we almost are palace people. "I say, it is lucky for you that you came to me. The dear Tisrock, may he live forever, is so kind. We're asked to the palace almost every day, and it's like a second home. I love all the dear princes and princesses, and I positively adore Prince Rapidash. I might run in there and see if the palace lady's at any hour of the day or night. Why shouldn't I slip in with you after dark and let you out by the water door? There are always a few punts and things tied up outside it. And even if we were caught, all would be lost, said Aravis. Oh, darling, don't get so excited, said Lazarine. I was going to say, even if we were caught, everyone would only say it was one of my mad jokes. I'm getting quite well known for them. Only the other day, do listen, dear, this is frightfully funny. I meant all would be lost for me, said Aravis a little sharply. Oh, yes, I do see what you mean, darling. Well, can you think of any better plan? Aravis couldn't, and answered, No, we'll have to risk it. When can we start? Oh, not tonight, said Lazarine. Of course not tonight. There's a great feast on tonight. I must start getting my hair done for it in a few minutes. And the whole place will be a blaze of lights, and such a crowd, too. It would have to be tomorrow night. This was bad news for Aravis, but she had to make the best of it. The afternoon passed very slowly, and it was a relief when Lazarine went out to the banquet, for Aravis was very tired of her giggling and her talk about dresses and parties, weddings and engagements and scandals. She went to bed early, and that part she did enjoy. It was so nice to have pillows and sheets again. But the day passed very slowly. Lazarine wanted to go back to the whole arrangement and kept on telling Aravis that Narnia was a country of perpetual snow and ice inhabited by demons and sorcerers, and she was mad to think of going there. Ugh, and with a peasant boy, too, said Lazarine. Darling, think of it. It's not nice. Aravis had thought of it a good deal, but she was so tired of Lazarine's silliness by now that, for the first time, she began to think that traveling with Shasta was really rather more fun than fashionable life in Tashbaan. So she only replied, You forget that I'll be nobody, just like him, when we get to Narnia. And anyway, I promised. And to think, said Lazarine, almost crying, that if you only you had the sense you could be the wife of the Grand Vizier. Aravis went away to having a private word with the horses. You must go with a groom of a little before sunset down to the tombs, she said. No more of those packs. You'll be saddled and bridled again, but there'll have to be food and Hwin saddlebags and a full waterskin behind yours, Bree. The man has orders to let you both have a good long drink at the far side of the bridge. And then Narnia and the North, whispered Bree. But what if Shasta's not at the tombs? Wait for him, of course, said Aravis. I hope you've been quite comfortable. Never better stabled in my life, said Bree. But if the husband of that tittering Tarkheena friend of yours is paying his head groom to get the best oats, then I think the head groom is cheating him. Aravis and Lazarine had supper in the pillared room. About 2 hours later, they were ready to start. Aravis was dressed to look like a superior slave girl in a great house and wore a veil over her face. They had agreed that if any questions were asked, Lazarine would pretend that Aravis was a slave she was taking as a peasant to one of the princesses. The two girls went on foot. A very few minutes brought them to the palace gates. Here there were of course soldiers on guard, but the officer knew Lazarine quite well and called his men to attention and saluted. They passed at once into the hall of black marble. A fair number of courtiers, slaves, and others were still moving about here, but this only made the two girls less conspicuous. They passed on into the hall of pillars, and then in the hall of statues, and down the colonnade, passing the great but beaten copper doors of the throne room. It was all magnificent beyond description, what they could see of it in the dim light of the lamps. Presently, they came out into the garden. Presently they came out into the garden court, which sloped downhill in a number of terraces. On the far side of that they came to the old palace. It had already grown almost quite dark, and they now found themselves in a maze of corridors, lit only by occasional torches fixed in brackets to the walls. Lazarine halted at a place where you had to go either left or right. "Go on, do go on," whispered Aravis, whose heart was beating terribly and who still felt that her father might run into them at any corner. "I'm just wondering," said Lazarine. "I'm not absolutely sure which way we go from here. I think it's to the left. Yes, I'm almost sure it's to the left. What fun this is!" They took the left-hand way and found themselves in a passage that was hardly lighted at all, and which soon began going down steps. "It's all right," said Lazarine. "I'm sure we're right now. I remember these steps." But at that moment, a moving light appeared ahead. A second later, there appeared from around a distant corner the shapes of two men, walking backward and carrying tall candles. And of course it is only before royalties that people walk backward. Aravis felt Lazarine grip her arm, the sort of grip which is almost a pinch, which means the person who is gripping you is very frightened indeed. Aravis thought it odd that Lazarine should be so terrified of the Tisroc if he were really such a good friend of hers. But there was no time to go on thinking. Lazarine was hurrying her back to the top of the steps on tiptoes and groping wildly at the wall. "Here's a door," she whispered. "Quick!" They went in, through the door softly behind them, and found themselves in pitch darkness. Aravis could hear that by Lazarine's breathing that she was terrified. "Tosh preserve us," whispered Lazarine. "What shall we do if he comes in here? Can we hide?" There was a soft carpet under their feet. They groped forward into the room and blundered onto a sofa. "Let's lie down behind it," whispered Lazarine. "Oh, I do wish we hadn't come." There was just enough room between the sofa and the curtain wall that the two girls got down. Lazarine managed to get the better position and was completely covered. The upper part of Aravis's face stuck out behind the sofa, so if anyone came into that room with a light and happened to look in exactly the right place, they would see her. But of course, because she was wearing the veil, what they saw would not at once look like a forehead and a pair of eyes. Aravis shoved desperately to try to make Lazarine give her more room, but Lazarine, now quite selfish in her panic, fought back and pinched her feet. They gave it up and lay still, panting a little. Their own breath seemed dreadfully noisy, but there was no other noise. "Is it safe?" said Aravis at last in the tiniest possible whisper. I think so," began Lazarine, "but my poor nerves." And then came the most terrible noise they could have heard at that moment. The noise of the door opening. And then came light. And because Aravis couldn't get her head any further in behind the sofa, she saw everything. First came the two slaves, deaf and dumb as Aravis rightly guessed, and therefore used at the most secret councils, walking behind and carrying the candles. They took up their stand, one at each end of the sofa. This was a good thing, for of course it was now harder for anyone to see Aravis once a slave was in front of her and she was looking between his heels. Then came an old man, very fat, wearing a curious pointed cap by which she immediately knew that he was the Tisroc. The least of the jewels with which he was covered was worth more than all the clothes and weapons of the Narnian lords put together. But he was so fat, and such a mass of frills, and pleats, and baubles, and buttons, and tassels, and talismans, that Aravis couldn't help thinking that the Narnian fashions, at any rate for men, looked nicer. After him came a tall young man, with a feathered and jeweled turban on his head, and an ivory-sheathed scimitar at his side. He seemed very excited, and his eyes and teeth flashed fiercely in the candlelight. Last of all came a little hump-backed, wizened old man, in whom she recognized with a shudder the new Grand Vizier and her own betrothed husband, Ahosja Tarkan himself. As soon as all three had entered the room and the door was shut, the Tisroc seated himself on the divan with a sigh of contentment. The young man took his place, standing before him, and the Grand Vizier got down on his knees and elbows and laid his face flat on the carpet. "Oh, my father, and oh, the delight of my eyes," began the young man, muttering the words very quickly and sulkily, and not at all as if the Tisroc were the delight of his eyes. "May you live forever, but you have utterly destroyed me. If you had given me the swiftest of the galleys at sunrise when I first saw the ship of the accursed barbarians was gone from her place, I would perhaps have overtaken them. But you persuaded me to send first and see if they had not merely moved round the point into better anchorage. And now the whole day has been wasted, and they are gone out of my reach. The false jade!" And here he added a great many descriptions of Queen Susan, which would not look at all nice in the print. For of course this young man was Prince Rabadash, and of course the false jade was Susan of Narnia. "Compose yourself, O my son," said the Tisroc, "for the departure of guests makes a wound that is easily healed in the heart of a judicious host." "But I want her," cried the prince. "I must have her. I shall die if I do not get her. False, proud, black-hearted daughter of a dog that she is. I cannot sleep, and my food has no savor, and my eyes are darkened because of her beauty. I must have the barbarian queen." "How well it was said by a gifted poet," observed the vizier, raising his face, in somewhat dusty condition, from the carpet, "that deep draughts from the fountain of reason are desirable in order to extinguish the fire of youthful love." This seemed to exasperate the prince. "Dog!" he shouted, directing a series of well-aimed kicks at the hindquarters of the vizier. "Do not dare quote the poets to me. I have had maxims and verses flung at me all day, and I can endure them no more." I am afraid Arvis did not feel at all sorry for the vizier. The Tisroc was apparently sunk in thought, but when after a long pause he noticed that what was happening, he said tranquilly, "My son, by all means desist from kicking the venerable and enlightened vizier, for as a costly jewel retains its value even if hidden in a dunghill, so old age and discretion are to be respected, even in the vile persons of our subjects. Desist, therefore, and tell us what you desire and propose." "I desire and propose, O my father," said Rabadash, "that you immediately call out your invincible armies and invade the thrice accursed land of Narnia, and waste it with fire and sword, and add it to your illimitable empire, killing their high king and all of his blood except the Queen Susan, for I must have her as my wife, though she shall learn a sharp lesson first." "Understand, O my son," said the Tisroc, "that no words you speak will ever move me to open war against Narnia." "If you were not my father, O ever-living Tisroc," said the prince, grinding his teeth, "I should say that was the word of a coward." "And if you were not my son, O most inflammable Rabadash," replied his father, "your life would be short and your death slow, and when you had said it." The cool, placid voice in which he spoke these words made Arvis's blood run cold. "But why, O my father," said the prince, this time in a much more respectful voice, "why should we think twice about punishing Narnia any more than about hanging an idle slave or sending a worn-out horse to be made into dog's meat? It is not the forced size of one of your least provinces. 1,000 spears could conquer it in 5 weeks. It is an unseemly blot on the skirts of your empire. Most undoubtedly, said the Tisroc. These little barbarian countries that call themselves free, which is as much as to say idle, disordered, and unprofitable, are hateful to the gods and to all persons of discernment. Then why have we suffered such a land as Narnia to remain thus long unsubdued? Know, O enlightened prince, said the Grand Vizier, that until the year in which your exalted father began his salutary and unending reign, the land of Narnia was covered with ice and snow, and was moreover ruled by a most powerful enchantress. This I very well know, O loquacious vizier, answered the prince, but I know also that the enchantress is dead, and the ice and snow have vanished, so that Narnia is now wholesome, fruitful, and delicious. And this change, O most learned prince, has doubtless been brought to pass by the powerful incantations of those wicked persons who now call themselves kings and queens of Narnia. I'm rather of the opinion, said Rabadash, that it has come about by the alteration of the stars and the operation of natural causes. All this, said the Tisroc, is a question for the disputations of learned men. I will never believe that so great an alteration and the killing of an old enchantress were effected without the aid of strong magic. And such things are to be expected in that land, which is chiefly inhabited by demons, in the shape of beasts that talk like men, and monsters that are half man and half beast. It is this commonly reported that the High King of Narnia, whom may the gods utterly reject, is supported by a demon of hideous aspect and irresistible maleficence, who appears in the shape of a lion. A maleficence, who appears in the shape of a lion. Therefore, the attacking of Narnia is dark and doubtful enterprise, and I'm determined not to put my hand out further than I can draw it back. How blessed is Kellerman, said the vizier, popping up his face again, on whose ruler the gods have been pleased to bestow prudence and circumspection. Yet, as the irrefutable and sapient Tisroc has said, it is very grievous to be constrained to keep our hands off such a dainty dish as Narnia. Gifted was the poet who said... But at this point, Ahasta noticed an impatient movement of the prince's toe and became suddenly silent. It is very grievous, said the Tisroc in his deep, quiet voice. Every morning the sun is darkened in my eyes, and every night my sleep is the less refreshing because I remember that Narnia is still free. Oh, my father, said Rabadash, how if I show you a way by which you can stretch your arm to take Narnia and yet draw it back unharmed if the attempt prove unfortunate? If you can show me that, O Rabadash, said the Tisroc, you will be the best of sons. Hear then, O father, this very night and in this hour I will take but 200 horse and ride across the desert, and it shall seem to all men that you know nothing of my going. On the second morning I shall be at the gates of King Loon's castle of Onvard in Archenland. They are at peace with us and unprepared, and I shall take Onvard before they have bestirred themselves. Then I will ride through the pass above Onvard and down through the Narnia to Cair Paravel. The High King will not be there. When I left them, he was already preparing a raid against the giants on his northern border. I shall find Cair Paravel, most likely with open gates, and ride in. I shall exercise prudence and courtesy and spill as little Narnian blood as I can. And what then remains but to sit there till the splendor of Hylane puts in, with Queen Susan on board, catch my strayed bird as she sets foot ashore, swing her into the saddle, and then ride back to Onvard? But it is not probable, my son, said the Tisroc, that at the taking of the woman either King Edmund or you will lose his life. They will be a small company, said Rabadash, and I will order 10 of my men to disarm and bind him, restraining my vehement desire for his blood, so that there shall be no deadly cause of war between you and the High King. And how, if the splendor Hylene is at Cair Paravel before you? I do not look for that with these winds, O my father. And lastly, O my resourceful son, said the Tisroc, you have made clear how all this might give you the barbarian woman, but not how it helps me to overthrowing of Narnia. Oh, my father, it can't have escaped you that though I and my horsemen will come and go through Narnia like an arrow from a bow, yet we shall have Onward forever. And when you hold Onvard, you sit at the very gate of Narnia, and your garrison in Onvard can be increased by little and little till it is a great host. It is spoken with understanding and foresight, but how do I draw back my arm if all this miscarries? You shall say that I did it without your knowledge, and against your will, and without your blessing, being constrained by the violence of my love and the impetuosity of my youth. And how, if the High King then demands that we send back the barbarian woman, his sister? Oh, my father, be assured that he will not, for though the fancy of a woman has rejected this marriage, the High King Peter is a man of prudence and understanding, who will in no way wish to lose the high honor and advantage of being allied to our house, and seeing his nephew and grandnephew on the throne of Calormen. He will not see that if I live forever, as is no doubt your wish, said the Tisroc in an even drier voice than usual. And also, O my father, and O the delight of my eyes, said the prince after a moment of awkward silence, we shall write letters, as if from the queen, to say that she loves me and has no desire to return to Narnia. For it is well known that women are as changeable as weathercocks. And even if they do not wholly believe the letters, they will not dare to come to Tashbaan in arms to fetch her. O enlightened vizier, said the Tisroc, bestow your wisdom upon us concerning this strange proposal. O eternal Tisroc, said Ahashta, the strength of paternal affection is not unknown to me, and I have often heard that the sons' are in the eyes of their fathers more precious than carbuncles. How then shall I dare freely to unfold to you my mind in a matter which may imperil the life of this exalted prince? Undoubtedly you will dare, replied the Tisroc, because you will find that the dangers of not doing so are at least equally great. To hear is to obey, moaned the wretched man. Know then, O most reasonable Tisroc, in the first place, that the danger of the prince is not altogether so great as might appear. For the gods have withheld from the barbarians the light of description, and that their poetry is not, like ours, full of choice apothegms and useful maxims, but is all of love and war. Therefore nothing will appear to them more noble and admirable than such a mad enterprise as this of— "Oh!" said for the prince at that moment, mad at the word mad, had kicked him. "Desist, O my son," said the Tisroc, "and you, estimable vizier, whether he desist or not, by no means allow the flow of your eloquence to be interrupted. For nothing is more suitable to persons of gravity and decorum than to endure minor inconveniencies with this constancy." "To hear is to obey," said the vizier, wiggling himself round a little so as to get his hinder parts further away from Rabadash's toe. "Nothing, I say, will seem as pardonable, if not esteemable, in their eyes as this hazardous attempt, especially because it is undertaken for the love of a woman. Therefore, if the prince by misfortune fell into their hands, they would assuredly not kill him. Nay, it may even be that, though he failed to carry off the queen, Yet the sight of his great valor and the extremity of his passion might incline her heart to him. That is a good point, old babbler, said Rabadash. Very good, however it came to your ugly head. The praise of my masters is the light of my eyes, said Ahasta. And secondly, O Tisroc, whose reign must and shall be interminable, I think that with the aid of the gods it is very likely that Onvard will fall into the prince's hands, and if so, we have Narnia by the throat. There was a long pause, and the room became so silent that the two girls hardly dared to breathe. At last the Tisroc spoke. Go, my son, and do as you have said, but expect no help nor countenance from me. I will not avenge you if you are killed, and I will not deliver you if the barbarians cast you into prison. And if either in success or failure you shed a drop more than you need of Narnian noble blood, and open war arises from it, my favor shall never fall upon you again, and your next brother shall have your place in Calormen. Now go. Be swift, secret, and fortunate. May the strength of the Tash and the inexorable and the irresistible be in your sword and lance. To hear is to obey, cried Rabadash, and after kneeling for a moment to kiss his father's hands, he rushed from the room, greatly to the disappointment of Arvis, who was now terribly cramped. The Tisroc and Vizier remained. That's where we'll leave it for today. So I guess they're in a bit sticky situation. I don't know how they're going to get out of it, because the Tisroc and the Vizier are still there, and they're cramped behind the sofa. But we will find out next week, and also we're going to find out if Rabadash is successful in trying to kidnap Prince Susan. So we got a lot going on here, and we also have to figure out where's Shasta. Did he and Bree and Hwin hook up yet? So lots of things to look forward to next week. I look forward to seeing you then.